Welcome back to Taking Stock, where we talk to experts in our small business community about how to tackle the challenges of business growth, operations, and technology in a way that builds better businesses, more productive teams, and stronger communities. As always, I'm your host, Deke Bowman, and today we're here with Ryan Brickwood. Ryan is the Director of Manufacturing and Distribution at Rea Associates, a business advisory and accounting firm in New Philadelphia, Ohio. Ryan, tell me a little bit about yourself. How do you end up at Rea, and what is your role there?
Yeah. Well, thanks first of all, Deke, for having me on the show. So Ryan Brickwood, as Deke mentioned, I came from Smuckers, actually. I was with Smuckers for about 17 years, mostly on the manufacturing and side of the business. I was a controller down in Memphis, Tennessee, with the jam and jelly ice cream toppings facility. How I got to Rea, actually is a funny story, is a previous worker at Smuckers was at Rea, and he
Okay.
reached out to me one day and said, "Hey, there's an opportunity here at Rea to lead the manufacturing distribution industry." And I've always had a passion for it. And so and then when I met with him and the team, it just felt like another opportunity for growth to lead a group.
Yeah.
And so therefore, like I went there and met with them and just felt like home. And
Okay.
so transferred over there about 3 years ago.
That's cool. So that's a fun pivot, I think, going from quite literally where the jam is made to advising people who are making the jam uh, and the sundry items for sure. Yeah, could you tell me a little bit about your customers that you serve at Rea, and how do you help them? What does a firm like Rea do for businesses who are making stuff?
Yeah, great question. So, yeah, our sweet spot of customers that we kind of focus on is 2 to 50 million in revenue. Now we have some clients that get up to over 100 million to up to a billion, but our sweet spot, like I said, is 2 to 50 million. And what we do for these clients, we're a lot more than just a assurance, compliance, tax. They bring experts and individuals in.
Hmm.
So for myself, where I came from, on the floor, on the production floor, that I can come out and help these clients. And so what our team typically does, we're helping a lot around the costing and the profitability, making sure, that they're understanding what's going on in that landscape, and then making sure we're pricing right, if
Okay.
possible. Raw materials are going up, commodities are going up, transportation, freight. $100 used to get you X amount, now $100 gets you a little bit less now today's world. And so we help a lot around the pricing and costing with companies. And then we also dabble in support companies that are growing, and they're outgrowing their ERP systems. So
Okay.
there's a lot out there, right? There's a lot industry specific ERPs. There's a lot of different tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. We're kind of trying to figure out what's the best for their company, and where they're going where they're growing. And so we want to make sure we do it right for them, because it's a huge investment in time. And then the third thing, we're kind of helping companies in our 2 to 50 landscape where they lose a resource. So we're doing some fractional CFO work. And so helping with, cash flow and cash flow forecasting around that as well, and budgeting and strategic planning. So a lot of opportunities that we
Hmm.
see in this area where clients do well what they know what they do well, but there's some areas that they don't have the expertise in house. So
Yeah.
that's where we kind of bridge that gap and kind of work with them and partner with them and be a trusted advisor.
Yeah. That's it. First of all, there's two observations I have. At the 2 to 50 million, that's quite a jump in terms of scale of a business. So I imagine the growth or that spectrum, and companies who are growing within that spectrum provide presents at least a broad array of opportunities, challenges, and problems. Um, so as you're working with these manufacturers who are graduating, maybe from what we might describe in the tech world as that scrappy startup mode, to something that's more formalized, more where process is driven, or needs to be created and generated. What's that look like? What are some signs when you get pulled into a firm that a company is growing from that we're just making stuff and trying to figure that out to we figured that out, but now we got to grow and scale?
Yeah. So another great question. So what we see, with clients, they start looking at, like, they're growing their top line, they're focused on revenue, and that's a key indicator, right? As their market and the
Mhm.
market share and whatnot.
Mhm.
But then they look at their bottom line and their profit, and they're saying, okay, we're seeing some things where their profits aren't scaling like that their
Mhm.
top line is. We're working with clients that, they might have grew their revenue 10%, 20%, but they're staying flat in the bottom line.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, our focus is, again, understanding where you're winning, where you're losing, and why. It's getting under that hood and identifying where things are, again, where your costs are going, where they're allocated, and understanding that to help make you better business decisions long term.
Yeah. It seems like there's mindsets, or like anything in life, you have growth stages, right? Like the adage of you crawl, you walk, you run. And with a business who's manufacturing your product, it seems like there's that gaining market share that you described, where you are simply figuring out what it means to be a manufacturer. And then as you're walking and running, there's those pivots and mindsets of how do you reinvest, how do you build efficiency in systems. And it seems like you're stepping in with them to help do that in really, really effective ways. You mentioned cost. When businesses start digging into that cost, and asking that question, how much does it really cost to make this widget? How do you go about that? Where do you begin? How do you help them orient themselves to understanding real costs?
Yeah. So what typically we kind of where we begin, we have like a checklist, and we got to get data from them. So we look at, their production, their volume, right? Their sales
Hmm.
volume. We look at square footage of their building, right? Because you're going to have to
Uh-huh.
allocate some cost, on different lines, right? And
Hmm.
so we start unpeeling like all the overhead. So overhead costs on the P&L.
Yeah.
We start understanding those accounts and kind of what work centers, what um, product lines you have, what customers or items are going through that, right? And so again, you can't just take an account and assume that, this allocation method is going to work for every industry, every client. So again, we're understanding their cost drivers. Like, again, is it production hours? Is it
Right.
production workers? So thinking on the labor side, right? How many workers are working on that line or that product,
Mm.
right? And then you have supervisors that help support the different lines, right? They're not allocated to a direct line, but their portion of their time is working on, this brand or this product. So how do you allocate their fixed time? There's also overhead, right? There's utilities being used. There's depreciation from all the capital equipment, the building, right? To make sure, hey, it's the rent you pay. How's that getting allocated down to the
Right.
lowest level to a product that you're making? You have to
Mm.
understand those, because at the end of the day, those costs got to go somewhere, and
Right.
it shouldn't go to all one area. So again, it's going into the lower level of detail to make sure we're properly allocating and that
Mm.
those costs are real. And again, once you get that data, this is where it becomes unique, where you can have, different levers to pull. So if you want to be more profitable, the easiest lever is to do pricing, right? But
Yeah.
that's not always easy to do. It's those tough conversations, and it always, if you don't understand those costs, how can you promote or
Mm.
ask for a price increase if you don't have the data? And secondly, if you're out of balance in some of these accounts, can we get operational excellence? Can we start driving out some of these variable costs that are that we think that are we're inefficient, you
Mhm.
know? And so that'll help if you are able to get those costs under control, and you get your cost per unit at the
Yeah.
right optimal price point, your margins you will see that.
Right.
You'll see that fall right to the bottom line as you're optimizing your operational excellence. So
That's interesting. So it seems like you're really going in and at a forensic level, dissecting a business to help them understand what's it, how much does this matter? What's it look like for a company to make this shift? So you essentially create this dichotomy between I'm managing this by my gut and I'm managing this with a really, really granular piece of data, which sounds like a lot of work, but also seems like it's a mindset shift of how a business runs in the manufacturing sector. So, what's it look like when businesses do that? Are there key results that you find, or is there ways that leaders have to change the way they think
yeah,
when they're going down this path?
great question. So Yeah. So once they have the data, they need to understand it, right? Because again, if you don't just have, because you have data doesn't mean it's going to always work for you. You got to really understand the why behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So as they get that, it helps them make different business decisions, right? And I brought up, about operational excellence. Well, if their utilities are out of whack or their scrap, or I'll just say, for example, if their scrap is really high,
Yeah.
say it's 10%. Well, that's 10% that's going to fall out right in the bottom line. So they may
Mm-hmm.
create a core team to help drive out loss or scrap. And
Okay.
so you get that down to 5% or 2%. What's that quantifying that dollar amount? You're able to do that because you understand your cost. Before, you
Mm-hmm.
just see stuff going down the drain. You don't really quantify those
Right.
dollars or understand the why behind it. It's tougher to get results on it, to know what to focus on, what to drive. Some companies, you know, they come to us because they don't get the final results. They don't see the
Mm.
final results, all the hard work they're doing. I got a prime example with a company we worked with where they doubled in revenue.
Yeah.
Well, their bottom line stayed flat. And they didn't understand all the aspects of why. And so what we did, our team did, was we went down at an item level and a customer level. So we
Okay.
went down some very low level detail. Well, what they got from that was they thought they were making money on some of these high volume items
Right.
that they were not. The price
Mm.
was out of whack. They didn't do anything with it initially. Well, what happened with the result of our analysis is now they had the data. Well, they went and updated their pricing, and they've been a lot more profitable since then. Very happy. Now they have the data. Now they have the template, and now they can build that going forward. And we update it our goal is or what we recommend is to update it every 6 months to a year,
Okay.
because your overhead, your labor will change, your rates,
Yeah.
cost of living goes up, certain materials go up, which that's even more frequent that you should do with your direct materials. And
Sure.
then some of your overhead costs, insurance, healthcare, workers' comp, all that stuff has gone up. It goes up and down, but as
Yeah.
it goes up and down, you need to make sure you adjust your costs to make sure you reflect those changes in the market and in those accounts.
Yeah. So I would assume that the initial setup of the template, this that or initial analysis of the business operations, that in-depth process you go through is pretty laborious and time consuming. Do businesses, if you're recommending every 6 months to a year, you're updating the data on that template, is there ever a pushback on that? And if so, what's that conversation look like with the owner? Because if you have this big effort, I think about this through the lens of ERP implementation, big effort of transition of how you think, and then I have to do this thing again. What's that look like? What's that conversation look like with your
Yeah. So,
clients?
yeah, great question. So the initial building of the template does take the most time and the most, investing more of the money, right? The more cost. But once we establish that template,
Hmm.
it's reapplying. It's those allocation rates are kind of set.
Yeah.
We go through them and go through the methodology of them. So updating that spreadsheet's not as costly or whatnot. We do offer to our clients to take that spreadsheet and they can update it. We teach them
Hmm.
if they have internal staff or resources. Our thing is with that, some of our clients do that because they have a strong team. They get it. We understand the why. They take it and run with it, and they have us review it.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I think that it is that workflow though that you have to kind of create the pattern, create the discipline of doing that, like many things in business. And business leaders, I think, know that, but sometimes those initiating efforts make things a little bit harder. Um, so this has been a fascinating segment to talk about costing, especially that transmission or that movement from like I'm managing my gut to managing my data. What are some of the ditches or pitfalls? Like, do you help companies or leaders know when they're winning or if they're failing in this process? Because I suspect there's margins or extremes either way. Fully flying by your gut versus needing every single amount of data before you make a decision. So, how do you help people navigate that tension?
Yeah. So some of the things that I see as pitfalls or things that you got to be aware of is when we do this analysis is like scope creep, like when they keep bringing in new things or different varieties or all this customization, right? You got to focus on the simple things, the blocking and tackling. What's a normal 90% way things will go from inputs to outputs? So we kind of want to focus on that strategically. Let's get a focus and let's prioritize. So that's one. Another one is, as we look through this, if they change methodology. So one year they do an allocation of this way for this utility. Okay.
Yeah.
And the next year they switch. All right. Well, why did you switch? Typically, unless the business model changes, you should not be switching your methodology year on year on year.
Right.
And I've seen companies in the past that have done that just because one year it helps one area, right? And then they want to switch it the next year, which is, again, that's tough to look at trends. That's tough to look at apples, right? I'm not joking. Some companies do that. It's not often, but we definitely don't recommend that. So when we build these models, we sit down with the client and say, make sure you understand what's the best cost driver for this account. Do you understand why we're allocating in this? Why is a portion of it getting more than another portion? As long as they understand that piece of it, they'll utilize it and say, that makes sense, and then that feeling of understanding those lower level costs will help them focus on things they got to drive out. Because there's always fat in an operation. There's low hanging fruit. Some of it's low hanging fruit initially, but some of it's harder to get, but there's some opportunities. Fixed is fixed. Salaries are fixed, unless you get rid of headcount, you're not going to be able to reduce fixed cost. Right. So your key is to get more out with the same people you have. If that's the optimization you have in your labor force, you need to optimize as many throughputs with great quality, great product that are going to sell. You need to utilize getting more out without increasing overtime, without increasing a lot of capital if possible. But sometimes you got to spend money to make money. It happens because you come to a point where you need a new machine to get X, from 10 million in revenue to 20 million. You don't have that machine you have currently will not do that trick. So again, you got to use that model of return on investment. You're going to spend $500,000 or $500,000 in capital. Is it worth what volume you're going to get? What kind of margins you're going to get, and start doing that ROI or that payback period to make sure you're getting the right return. If not, why are you spending on this machine?
Sure. It's interesting too, because what you're describing also has a knock-on effect, right? So the big theme I'm seeing is moving from it all being in a single room and I can see everything and know what's going on. Maybe the buyer. I'm also part of the sales. So I have the picture in my head so I can manage that super startup, the garage motif, to the industry, the factory, where it's impossible to do that and you require the data. So that's that movement from the gut to the data, but that translates into growth decisions to scale. So buying new machine, optimizing labor, looking at processes and how to increase throughput with the same tooling. But all that I think is interesting. The interesting part of that to me is it's rooted in understanding costs and the data that you're able to capture.
Yep. And one thing to add real quick, Deke, so these owners, these operations, their board of directors, again, they only have certain time in the day, right? And so you want to focus, if you understand that cost and that profit, you're going to spend all your money on the most profitable things, and if you have money to spend, right? So if you have money that you want to invest back in the company, if you have this data and understand those different product lines and those different margins, you're going to spend more time on marketing on those more profitable, the higher volume items, because again, that's going to fall, you're going to fall to the bottom line. If you start taking that money and investing in products that are either breaking even or losing money, that's going to hurt. You're going to dilute your margins, right? And so you're going to dilute your areas of focus where you need to focus your time on your people, your technologies and processes. I always look at those three areas to help. Okay, where can I get my most bang for my buck? If I have $1 to spend, where do I want to spend that dollar? What area? And if they don't know that, you're not strategically doing things. Now, a lot of companies went by their gut, and maybe that's leading them to it, and that gets you to a certain point. But at some point in time, you will not be efficient in your time because that you don't have all the facts. And that's what I always say when I make a decision is I need all the facts. I won't
Sure.
make a decision. And if I don't have those facts, how can I make a decision? Now, there's times when you won't be able to get the facts. You're going to have to make a call or
Right.
go or no go. But it's a lot easier to make a call, go or no go, if you have the data and the information in front of you to do that. You'll feel a lot better. You'll sleep better at night. At least I do.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great. I'd love to pivot to talk a little bit more about pricing and I guess in some ways what you were just talking about is that selection of products. Like, so you've done your cost accounting, you understand what's influencing the cost, but how do you use that um, to really dial in the pricing strategy? Like, how do you? So that's again part of what you're talking about is that we spend a lot of the conversation has been about understanding the costs, and you've hinted at customers who use that to have pricing conversations, but there seems to be probably some insights about how people approach pricing and how they address that strategy when you go through that.
Yeah. So once you, like to your point, once you understand the base cost, it's like, what does the pricing look like? Again,
Mm-hmm.
this goes back to your strategic plan or your go-to-market strategy. So how are you going to go to market? And each industry is different. You know your customers, right? You know your customer base. And so what I look at pricing, and again, it's a game, right? There's times where you may shoot long or shoot short when you know, again, it's a give and take, right?
Yeah.
And it depends on how the relationships you have with your customers and your customer base and how long you've been, what maturity you are in the whole scheme of things, right? Because
Yeah.
if you're in a position of strength, you have a different type of pricing than you would have position of weakness or not as strong, right? Your brand or your product. So going back to answer your question is, you know, you got to set goals for what margins do you want to hit? There's certain margins you may want to hit. Maybe it's 10%, maybe it's 15%, maybe it's 20. And based on those goals, okay, I'm controlling my costs. That's one big thing you can control. And you can control price to a certain point. Well, then the market will dictate. So again, are you a customization shop? So again, when I think of customization shops, I think of higher priced items because, you know, it takes a lot of different things to get that. Not everyone can do that. You can't, those are lots low volume, you know, highly customized. When you're going higher volume items that you know, pumping out every day, every hour, you know, those are different price points than customization. So you've got to understand, you know, where can you push? Where do you have to pull back? And then sometimes depends on your cash flow, you know, position. Do you need to get some more turns out? So maybe you run a discount.
Yeah.
You run a discount for a certain period of time to get the market understanding your product, to get your market buying it. And then once you get that and you see that it did well, then you maybe raise the price a little bit to get, okay, now they like the product. Now I got to raise it because I want to hit certain margins now to make sure, okay, they're going to repeat buyers. You want repeat buyers. So it's always a give and take, but you have to understand your industry and you got to understand your market and your customer base. And secondly, you know, do you need to have a top to top with some of these customers, right? Here's what I'm thinking. Here's what I'm doing. Here's the market. If you're a tier one supplier, you know, you're supporting someone else. It depends on, again, do you dictate it or are they dictating to you? So that sometimes you'll have more control or less to control on pricing.
Yeah. So it seems like, again, you're painting this like great picture. As a manufacturer, you got to know your costs. You got to run with the data. You got to know your market, so you know what the market can bear and have the relationship with your buyers, your customers, so you know it's reasonable to dominate, to be able to be a player and be that go-to vendor for what you're selling. I'd be curious if you could share a couple of stories of your experience when you've had a couple of companies that you've invested in, done the good cost counting, engaged in the price conversation. Yeah, can you just share what kind of transformation they've experienced?
Yeah. So I think I hit on it a little bit, but on the one client we were dealt with, again, once they understood their costing, they were able to start setting price points that they felt comfortable with.
Right.
And they were kind of understanding the market, but they really didn't know, you know, what was driving it and whatnot. Well, they started looking at I go back to their cost and saying, okay, this is what cost to make this widget. And then this is what I want to get out of it from a price point. That's where they start looking at their portfolio and saying, okay, we're not winning in these areas. Okay. Even if we raise price, we're going to lose more volume. So it's not going to cover the costs that we need, our fixed costs. So why are we doing that? Why don't we take that time and that runtime and those machines and pivot to something else?
Right.
And that's what they started doing because, again, they reduced their portfolio from 100 items to 75. And guess what? They were more profitable and the revenue didn't shrink. So again, those are good success stories. If they would have started pumping in, those dollars and saying production, hey, make these 5 widgets that aren't making money. They're either breaking even or losing money.
Right.
Well, they're just sitting there. They're not turning. So they're in your inventory and the inventory is tied with your cash. So again, your cash flow is tight. You're not profitable. Those are both whammies because again, they went and said, we're not making these anymore. We're going to take that line time and make product A, B, and C that's got gross margin at 30 to 40%. And just see how that impact of the company wide from a top line may change if you change price, but top line may not change, but your bottom line just grew significantly because of that decisions you made.
Yeah, it seems like that is probably, I would guess that's probably a common story. Is that true that when you get into businesses and you actually do the costing analysis, you get in there and you start applying the data to the portfolio, that companies are making things that are either a net loss or they just are flat? They're SKUs in their catalog that need to probably just be deprecated and let go.
Yeah, it's SKUs and it's also customers, Deke. I mean, customers as well, because again, not all customers are strategic customers. There's strategic customers and there's maintaining customers. And then there's customers that are kind of losing velocity and not getting the volume or the traction you want. So again, same way in the customer base, you need to look at not just from a SKU perspective, but also a customer base to make sure, okay, what customers do I want to start marketing with? Who I want to partner with? Because if some customers aren't growing, why would you bet on that horse? You're going to bet on a horse that, hey, you want to grow with them, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we do with our clients. We want clients that are wanting to grow, that want to, succession plan, want to grow, want to maintain, keep that, prosper, right? We don't want clients that are satisfied where they're at. They're complacent. They don't want to grow. We'll help them, but we want clients that are continue to look for opportunities for growth and opportunities for people to get, new experiences, because as you grow, people get promoted, get more opportunities. And, it's a great story, right?
Yeah.
You see these companies that startups and they start up. We have a client that started, 1 to 2 million, now they're at 14, 15 million, just the growth, and they're investing in technology and investing in people, that we love to see like that growth because we're there with them and we see it. We're advising them. They're asking us questions and we're working together. And that's what, at the end of the day, is what we want to do. It's to help them and make sure they're making the right decisions long-term.
Yeah, that's exciting. I think that's a great segue into kind of this kind of question. So you've pressed on like the different facets of business. And the one area that we haven't talked about is the optimization or automation piece. And there's obviously tools to do that. There's machinery, but there's also technology, and there's no shortage of those tools. How do you help growing manufacturers frame those decisions or ask the right questions of what they do and don't need, or how to like go about learning about how to make those automations or optimizations in their business?
Yeah. So what we typically do, it depends on where they're at in their journey.
Yeah.
So everyone's in a different path. Some are at the crawl stage, some are at the walk stage, and some are at the run stage. We always ask them, what's your 1 to 5 year goals, strategic goals? That's going to scale up with what they're going to invest in on the technology side. You brought up technology and automation. So there is automation that we would suggest if they're there. If they're not there, it's like we introduce, like the first thing is, do they have an ERP system, right?
Okay.
How they're gathering the data. And that's important because data is important. You want a single source of truth. A lot of companies we deal with, they don't utilize the single source of truth to make sure they're getting the right data points. So they'll come into a meeting. The operations guy will have a number. The marketing will have a number. Finance will have a different number. They're all different numbers. So like who's right and who's wrong. So we want to make sure we get a single source of truth. And then from there, okay, how do you automate, AI is coming down, artificial intelligence, there's business intelligence, there's
Yeah.
dashboarding, and again, it's like, what's right for the company? What's right for
Mhm.
the client? And it all depends. It's not a one-stop shop, one single answer. But again, if they're in their more developed stage, we're gonna get like Power Automate, which Power Automate can do a computer doing human tasks. So it
Right.
reads OCR, and reading documents and putting it to the right account. Currently today, you have an AR, you have an AP. Well, it can help utilize that time. So a
Yep.
repetitive task that they're doing 2 to 4 hours a week or 2 to 4 hours a month, we can automate that so then they can start working on other things. They can
Yeah.
start working on the business. They can start working in the business, talking to customers, talking to sales, the sales team,
Yeah.
working with the operations team. So again, we want to utilize some automation where, prime example, we had clients that were closed their books 15, 20 days after the month. Okay.
Okay. Wow.
Well, that's way too long, right?
Yeah.
It's stale. You're not proactive. What would you do with if you could close it in 5 days? So we worked with a client. Now they're closing in 5 days. So those 10 extra days, you're proactive. You got the numbers. Now you can do something about it. If you close in 15 to 20 days, the next month's already done. So
Yeah.
you're not going to fix it to the next month. So the next
Right.
quarter, probably. So
Right.
again, looking at things where we can get things quicker and faster in front of leadership, in front of the owners, in front of the CFO, COO, to make sure we get that quick and fast. So they're nimble and flexible and dynamic versus stagnant. So that's a lot of things on the back end tools, but it's a long-winded answer to answer your question is, we analyze each client specifically on
Mhm.
what their needs are and where they're at in their strategic process from an IT standpoint, from an operations standpoint, and from a business standpoint, where they're at.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So um, there's a couple of threads I want to pull on, and I'd be a fool not to ask about ERP. You let out with ERP. Coble's obviously an ERP vendor, but I'd love to hear from you. Like, why? What is the superpower of ERP for a manufacturing business? What does it provide a company that other solutions don't?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So when you scale up, when companies grow, so a lot of companies that we deal with, they're on QuickBooks or
Yeah.
QuickBooks Online. Well, they grow, initially, maybe when they start up, that tool would work for them. It's their ERP. It's calculate, it's calculating all the data, the finance side of it. It doesn't have the operation side of it, right?
Yeah.
If you don't have that data points, you're flying blind, right?
Mm.
QuickBooks also doesn't have, and it does well in certain areas, but it doesn't have visibility of inventory,
Sure.
until you do a physical. Well, the importance of understanding what your raw materials are at each point in
Mm.
time, because if you don't have those raw materials, if you don't have a good ERP system that
Yeah.
can give you that visibility, then you could be losing customers or losing orders,
Mhm.
right? If you don't have it in, you don't have the visibility, you think it's out there, but unless you're on top of doing cycle counts or someone walking the floor, and again, that is not always a value added if you keep having to do that. Why don't the
Right.
system track that with your bombs, your bill of materials flowing through, consuming it, so you have visibility of, okay, what do we have in hand? What are the orders that we have, future
Right.
orders and current orders? And then what do we need to purchase? And when do we need to reorder? That visibility is not there for a lot of ERPs. The good ones, they have it. So if you have that, the importance of, having your inventory, in a good state. We see a lot of companies at the year end, they're having $1 million, $2 million write-offs in inventory because,
Oh
again,
my gosh.
they're not having that ERP system that's properly tracking. And again, just because you have an ERP system, just to be clear, you still have to have processes in place to make sure someone's doing
Right.
it timely, effectively, and correctly, right?
Yeah.
But that ERP is the breadth of your company, because that data that you're getting on the operations side, the finance side, is helping you make business decisions short term and long term. And if you don't have those key modules
Yeah.
in an ERP, it's tough to actually grow. We've seen companies 20, 30, 40 million that are on ERPs that aren't at the right, the right level that they need, and it's held them back. We had a prime example. We had a company that just recently went through an ERP upgrade, and they're in the 15 to 20 million revenue space. And they told me at the end of it, if they didn't do this ERP, they would be nowhere near where they're going to go and what they're going to in the future. So they want to be at 40 million, 60 million. If they didn't have that ERP system, they'd still be at the 10 million to 15 million state right now. I definitely seen it in my previous experiences. If you don't scale up, as you grow that top line, as you grow that bottom line, if you can't scale up with people, technology, and processes, it'll eventually break. And that's what that ERP system can help get you there. It has the modules that if you utilize it correctly, you set it up correctly, you got your processes in place, it can get you to new levels because you have the visibility now.
Yeah.
You look at trends, you look at budgets, you look at forecasting. Those all can help you make decisions later on. So the key is, getting that data out of an ERP system and then utilizing it and making business decisions off of it. So ERP systems are critical and crucial for scaling up, for sure.
That's a good take. You do this every day, so you have the on the ground experience, both as a former manufacturing, work coming from industry, but also in advising. It's an interesting frame because you also framed it not just as technology alone. It's not that a Lego block that if you just add it to the business, ta-da, things happen. There's people and process that go along with it, which is that holistic view of the business. What are some other tools? You mentioned ERP. You also mentioned automations around AR and AP inputs using OCR technologies there's several out there. Are there any other tools that you would call out for companies to be thinking about, being aware of as they grow that are critical along the life cycle of a manufacturer?
Yeah. So the one I would say is on the back end. So a lot of the ERP systems that you're going to get, the reporting is not dynamic.
Okay.
So it's very stagnant.
Yeah.
I mean, it'll do a task, and there's some that are better than others.
Yeah.
So not all of them are great, but there's a lot that are decent. But what we would suggest, or something that we would recommend, is on the data analytics and KPIs, building dashboards. And that's a technology that you can use where if you have multiple sources, so maybe payroll is not in your ERP,
Right.
or maybe a warehouse, shipping, a WMS system is not in your ERP.
Yeah.
But you can pull multiple sources of data from your ERP plus that warehouse management system or payroll and compile things quickly, fast, and automate those. So now you have the dashboards on your tablet, on your phone, wherever you're at, and you can see how we're doing. If you look at that, you set that up, you can look on the operations and the lines, you can say what's up, what's running, what's down. So, quickly give indicators, instead of waiting till someone has to go on the line and physically be there. You need to have more real-time data.
Yeah.
Before, pricing was, you had some pricings ups and downs and commodities went as they went, but there's a lot more dynamic, uncertainty going on now in today's world. And so you got to be on top of it. You got to be quick to have the competitive advantage. You got to be quick and be able to react, but you only want to quick and react is if you have the data in front of you. And that's where the dashboarding can help you do that quicker and faster.
Yeah. So it seems like some themes are minimize fragmentation of data when possible, bring it together in real-time visualizations, and then create automation or adopt automation tools to increase throughput and make human work more human and machine work more machine work.
Correct. And you can eliminate journal entries. You can eliminate the hands on the keyboard, right?
Right.
With some of that stuff and some of those tools. And again, it depends on where you're at in your journey, if you're ready to take that leap or not. But again, you first got to crawl, walk, run, and make sure you don't try to run if you're at the crawl stage. I mean, you got to make sure you're doing it the right timing and the right steps, because I've seen pitfalls where people try to take on the world and take on everything, and they get swallowed by the elephant. And now it's kind of breaking that elephant up in pieces and start attacking those and accomplishing those and moving to the next one. And as you bring them together, now you have the whole elephant together because you went in pieces versus trying to swallow it at once.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Final few questions for you, Ryan. What are some of the common pitfalls you see manufacturers when they start scaling? So business, we've talked about a lot of different things about costing and pricing and how to select SKUs and customers and even technology and automation. But as manufacturers start to scale, what are those things that you would call out for people to be aware of or look for as they're starting to walk and then run, as they're starting to scale up market?
Yeah. One thing that they got to be aware of is make sure they have good business processes in
Yeah.
place. Because I see so much as they scale up, if their processes aren't good and in place, it starts breaking, and
Mm,
starts failing. And so business processes important. Um, they also need to have a roadmap. A lot
mhm.
of companies, again, they just react, right?
Yeah.
Something comes down, they're going to react. Well, they got to start planning ahead 1 to 5 year goals. And that could be strategic goals. That can be top line revenue. That can be profit.
Right.
They also need to look at that from a technology standpoint. If those are driving, is that your key metrics? Is it the revenue? Is it the profit? Is it the gross margin? How does your people, process, and technology scale with it? So you got to make
Mm,
sure, like I see companies grow, and they keep throwing money at it. Well, eventually they don't have the infrastructure to support that, the
yeah.
team or the systems or the capital, and it all starts breaking because they can't handle it. Even though they have all these orders, they
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
can't they can't supply it.
Right.
Supply and demand. So that's the key is people, processes, and technology, making sure you have a strategic plan in place that it aligns, that everyone's saying the same message, that they're all understanding where we're trying to get to.
Yeah.
Because the more visible it is, the more that leadership and team below understand that, then you're rowing the same way instead
Yeah.
of some people rowing one way and another person running it rowing another because they don't have that visibility. They think they know it, but again, without having that clear vision and strategic plan, you're not going to know where you're going to go to. You're just walking. You're just
Yeah.
blindly walking. So at least have that and then have metrics along the way to scorecard you. Hold yourselves accountable for it. Are you making that stride? Because again, year one, you're not going to hit that end goal. It takes time. It's a journey. It's not a sprint. So where you at in that process? Are you making strides to it? Or do we need to start focusing some areas that we're a little bit
Hmm.
behind to start, getting there? So
Yeah.
that's the thing I would say is a very clear strategic vision that goes along with your processes, people, and technology.
Yeah. That's great. What are some, if you could sit down with every business leader at the beginning of their ERP or cost accounting journey, or as they're making that pivot to growth, um, what's the one thing you'd ask them to think about first before they embarked on that journey?
So I would probably say, okay, again, going back to what are your goals? What is your plan? Because again, the more we understand where you're trying to get to, the better we're gonna be able to answer that question. So, you know, before we even sit down, it's like, okay, what is your goal for this business? This is your baby. This is what you took from, start. It's your pride and joy. It's your life, right? You got your kids in there. You got your family in there.
Mhm.
You're taking care of other people's families,
Yeah.
by paying them and taking care of their, families and in their families. So again, it's what vision do you have for your company? Again, that
Yeah.
answer will help dictate where we go next if it's worth the investment. Maybe they're like, hey, we're satisfied here. We don't need this yet. That's fine. We'll put that in a 10-year plan then if you want to get there later. But if you're not there yet, we don't want to force anything upon someone if they're not there yet.
Yeah.
We can recommend things if it makes sense, but if it doesn't make sense, I'm not going to order a Cadillac if they need a Honda. Like making
Sure.
sure
Absolutely.
from an ERP system, what's the best fit for them,
Yeah.
and where they want to go to. If they're upfront and honest with that, it's a lot easier discussion and have like, okay, we know where you are, where you're going. This is what we're going to recommend and suggest. That's how we work with clients.
Yeah.
Where we sit down with their owners and say, what's your vision? What's your goals? And then we go from there.
Great. What are any additional resources you'd recommend to manufacturing businesses as they navigate growth and the normal business challenges that you see with your clients?
So what I would recommend is them to get involved in the community. That's one thing. Understand their people, understand, who they're taking care of around them. Another thing is join a roundtable. We dealt with executive roundtables. Great to bounce ideas of companies, what they're doing well. It's a free environment where you can open up. and kind of see what issues do they have and what are things that are working for them. Can they implement some of those things? So learn from each other. So executive roundtables as well. I would say, making sure reading and learning. You always got to be learning. A lot going on in the world. I read, not always, but I do look at the Wall Street Journal at times. A lot of things going on with tariffs, new laws, new tax laws, new businesses. Again, you can learn from some of the people's mistakes and some of the things that they're doing well. So again, join the community, executive roundtable, as they can bounce ideas off of other leaders, and then continue to learn by reading and asking questions. Be inquisitive, ask questions. If you have a mentor or a trusted advisor, lean on them. Ask them questions. Say, hey, what about this? What about this? Can they help you out in any way? But that's kind of what I would recommend for owners.
That's fantastic, Ryan. At the end of the show, I always ask our guests what are 3 books they'd recommend to our listeners, because business owners are learners. So, and one of the things you advise is to continue to read and learn. So what are 3 books that you would recommend or things to read for our listeners?
Great question. I don't know if I have 3, but I can at least give you 2.
Great.
One book I would recommend is Good to Great. I read that, a couple of times, and again, figuring out how to take your business from doing well, think you're doing well, to a great and long lasting company. So Good to Great would be one. There's a lot around EOS that I see in Traction. Traction's is a good book. If you want to implement some key metrics and some things that you want to help drive a business. Those are the 2 I would recommend that from a business standpoint, that I think would be value added for them to read.
Amazing. Well, thank you for tuning in. Ted, Ryan, thank you for joining us. This has been a great conversation to learn about manufacturing and learn about some of the changes of growth and the challenges from going from a startup or smaller firm who's manufacturing stuff in that context and growing into the larger companies who are delivering more value and more impact to the communities. Thank you for tuning in today's episode. If you enjoyed the conversation and found it helpful, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. We'll be bringing practical advice and expert perspectives to help you build a better business, more productive teams, and stronger communities. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover in a future episode, let us know at marketing@koblesystems.com. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, I'm Deke Bowman, and this is Taking Stock. We'll see you soon.